Hello and welcome to the Divorce Do's and Don'ts show. I'm Lisa Decker, your host, and I am so grateful to have you here today. We have a special guest that we are delighted to have, Dr. Amy Baker, and I'm going to let her introduce herself. But before I do, I want you to know that she is the author of more than 9 books and a subject matter expert on parental alienation. And we are going to learn a lot here today. So stick with us, folks. And at the end of this show, at the end of this half hour, we're going to go live and have your questions answered by Dr. Baker. So Amy, welcome. Welcome to our show today. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about you and the work that you do and how you came to get involved in this particular subject matter?
Sure. So I have a PhD in developmental psychology from Teachers College of Columbia University. And for pretty much my whole professional career, I've been interested in focusing on parent-child relationships, primarily problematic parent-child relationships. So I've done some research on depressed parents or parents who aren't involved in their children's education. A lot of work in the child welfare field, foster parent and child relationships, abusive parent-child relationships. And so parental alienation is one facet of a larger body of work that I've been involved in for my whole professional life. I do have a subspecialty in parental alienation, and I have written, I don't know if it's 8 or 9 books, but with one exception. One is a research methods textbooks. They are all on various aspects of parental alienation, whether from the perspective of the adult child who lived through it as a child, or parents who are currently dealing with it, or books for clinicians to work with adult children or work with younger children, and books for parents about how they've survived this experience and how to deal with the legal aspects of it, and how to parent their child in the context of a parental alienation dynamic. And I do a lot of parent coaching. That's really the focus of most of my parental alienation work at this point. I did a lot of expert witness work, but I do not do that anymore.
Wow, that covers a lot of gamut, and there's a lot of folks who need to know this information. So from the parent perspective, I'm curious. We have folks logging on. Thank you for turning your camera off. We're going to be going live to answer your questions at the end here. But from a parent perspective, are you working with parents who have been alienated or those who have alienated the other parent, or both? And how do you find the work to be different in those cases?
Yeah, so it is extremely rare for the presumed alienating parent to want coaching from me. 99%, if not more, of my coaching clients, and I've been doing this since 2014, and I have probably thousands of clients that I've talked to at this point. Most people don't want weekly sessions. Most people drop in and out of the coaching on an as needed basis. So I've accumulated a vast, list of parents I've worked with. Most are the parents who are being rejected by their child and are trying to figure out, is it alienation? What is the other parent doing? How can they be a more effective parent? I do a little bit in my coaching, helping people navigate the legal system. I'm not a legal professional, so I don't give legal advice, but I can sort of help people prepare for a custody evaluation, or here's some questions to ask your attorney, or here's a way to think about what you're going through, or here's what other parents have done with respect to court. But most of my clients are targeted parents.
That would make sense. Yes. So I just didn't know if maybe some who have alienated have, come to see the light and now want help and, reunifying.
I wish. Sometimes people come to me because they believe they're being falsely accused of alienation. And I will try to help them figure out, are they in fact engaging in parental alienation behaviors? Because there is a sort of out there, sort of generally speaking, when we think about alienation, people generally think that alienation means bad mouthing. And it's like, well, I'm not bad mouthing the other parent to my kids. So therefore, I'm not guilty of alienation. And I try to explain there's 17 primary parental alienation strategies. Bad mouthing is just one. And
Mm, wonderful.
sometimes that helps people sort of see whether they are or aren't doing it. But very few people say, I'm an evil alienator and I've come to I've had an epiphany that this is bad for my kids. Help me do better. I wish, but not that common.
In a perfect world. Well, tell us more then about when someone is dealing with true alienation, parental alienation. How do they know that? What signs do they see within their children? You say there's
So
17 signs. What are the major ones?
So the first thing is, of course, if your child is rejecting you, it's very, very painful. Sometimes it seems like it sort of comes out of nowhere. Like you have a good visit and then you send your kid to the other parent, and then the kid's like, I hate you and never want to come back. I mean, sometimes it seems inexplicable. Most people who are dealing with this land on the idea of alienation because it resonates for them. But that doesn't mean that everybody who's rejected by their child is actually dealing with alienation. There are a subset of kids who cut off contact with a parent for legitimate reasons. Does it happen often? No. But we do not ever want to be in a position of saying, if your child rejects you, you are therefore, by definition, dealing with alienation. In order to know whether a rejecting child is an alienated child, you have to look at the behavior of the rejected or targeted parent. They have to look to themselves. Have I done something that's contributed to my child's rejection of me? Have I abused, abandoned, neglected, maltreated my child? Have I been engaged in, clinically suboptimal, deficient parenting? You have to look at whether you've put in the time and energy and love into forming an attachment with your relationship before there was a break. And you have to look at the behavior of the favored parent. That's where the 17 primary parental alienation strategies come in. There are 17 things that a parent can do that research shows can foster a child's unjustified rejection of the other parent. And then you have to look at the behavior of the child, because rejecting a parent is not in and of itself determinative of whether it's alienation or not. There's 8 specific behaviors that alienated kids exhibit that even kids who have been abused, abandoned, molested, beaten, neglected by a parent do not exhibit towards that parent who hurt them. So there's 8 behaviors that only alienated kids exhibit. So you have to look at sort of everybody, the full family system, and then you can say, okay, it's alienation or not.
So what, do tell, what are the 8 symptoms that the children would show that are definitely proof of?
Yes. So they
Most
have
likely proof.
names, and I can go through the names, but I also want to explain them because the names they're not totally self-evident. So for example, the campaign of denigration is the first one. And that doesn't in and of itself explain what it is. But the best way to think about the campaign of denigration on the child's part, we're talking about the 8 behaviors of an alienated child, just to be clear, not the 17 behaviors of the favored parent. So the campaign of denigration is the first one. That's generally not just hostile rejecting behavior towards the parent, but wiping out the past, for example. So if you say to an alienated child, tell me a good memory something you like, something good, a fun time you had with the parent who you now say you hate. Alienated kids will be like, I never had a good time with that parent. If you show them a photograph, literally you show an alienated kid a picture of them snuggling or laughing or hugging or having fun, Disneyland, at the beach, whatever, with the parent they now say they hate, they will say, like, that's not me. I wasn't really happy. I was told I had to smile. I've never had a good time with that parent. So that's
Mm.
sort of the past. The present, the kids are incredibly uncooperative. And in terms of the future, if you ask an alienated child, well, what could mom or dad, whoever the rejected parent is, what could that parent do to fix things? They will say, nothing. I can't imagine anything that would fix this. And if they do pick something like, well, they need to take an anger management course, or they need to let me have unlimited access to the internet, whatever. If the parent does those things, they just come up with another complaint. So in general, the campaign denigration is erasing the positive past, incredibly negative in the present, and not invested in improving the relationship. And
Well,
just to
can I
be
stop you for the question there?
sure.
Is this denigration process done by the alienator parent so that the child becomes this, where they erase their memories, they have no interest in the future? Or is it the child has just done this on their own? I just want to have that understanding for folks listening.
Right. So in the alienation model, the alienating parent engages in behaviors. There's 17 behaviors. None of them are called the campaign of denigration. That phrase is reserved for the behavior of the child. But there's 17 parenting behaviors that induce in the child these 8 manifestations of alienation, one of which is referred to as the campaign of denigration, and refers to a set of behaviors in the child, a set of attitudes of completely devaluing the relationship. Another of the 8 behavioral manifestations of alienation is lack of ambivalence, meaning if you ask an alienated child what's something good and bad about each parent, they will be unable or refuse to say anything bad about the favored parent, even though all parents are imperfect. And they'll refuse to say anything good about the rejected parent, even though that parent obviously has some positive attributes. So it's inability to see the good and bad, which is what ambivalence means. So this is a lack of ambivalence, meaning one parent is all good, the other parent is all bad, even though objectively speaking, that's not true. Another is lack of remorse. So alienated kids treat the targeted parent very cruelly, very callously, and yet they act as if they really do not care about or even consider the feelings of the targeted parent. So they're just completely, they behave in a way as if that other parent is not even a human being who deserves like the basic, common courtesy. So it's like, I know mom gave me that $200, but that was just to look good for the judge, so I don't have to thank her. It's like nothing that person does is worthy of consideration or respect. And just as an example, I had a client who showed me this video of his daughter saying, Dad, if I had a watch and it was an old watch and it broke, I would just throw it in the garbage. And that's how I feel about you. If you died, I would just throw you in the garbage. And I would just say, oh, well. I mean, that is callous beyond what, pretty much anybody would treat another human being. Somebody you didn't even know would be treated better than the way these kids treat the targeted parent. So those are just 3, the campaign of denigration, lack of ambivalence, and lack of remorse. But there's 8, and they go together. And when you see those 8 behaviors in a child, in combination with many, doesn't have to be all, but many of the 17 primary parental alienation strategies, and you as a targeted parent had a good relationship with your kid, and you didn't abuse, abandon, neglect your child, or give them a good reason to reject you, then you have a child who's alienated.
My goodness, this goes very, very deep. Let's also talk about some of those 17. What are the most common that you see in the strategies of?
Sure. So obviously the most common is bad mouthing. But to be clear, all parents engage in some eye rolling, like, oh, I can't believe that other parent's late again. We're talking not just random little bits of negativity. We're talking about a steady stream of negative messaging from the alienating parent to the child about the other parent, such that pretty much everything that parent does is seen in the worst possible light. So, as an example, if the targeted parent comes 10 minutes for the pickup, they're stalking. If they come 10 minutes late, they don't care. It's very hard to be perfect. You can be cast as caring too much about health food or not caring enough, caring too much about grades or not caring enough. And kids are susceptible to that kind of interpretation. So a kid who says, "Oh, dad served me broccoli for dinner," the favorite parent can be, "Oh, broccoli again? Don't they know you prefer asparagus?" Whereas maybe another parent who's not an alienator would say, I guess you got to take that up with your dad if you're not so thrilled about broccoli. Or, well, dad, he loves broccoli. I mean, there's a million ways to respond when a child shares something, and the alienator interprets everything as proof that the other parent doesn't love them. And often the alienating parent encourages the child to create these truly no-win situations, like putting the kid up to calling the targeted parent saying, "Don't come to my soccer practice. It's weird the way you look in the stand, in the bleachers. Nobody wants you there." So if the parent doesn't go to the soccer practice, then they're sort of, "Oh, look at how easy they gave up. Nothing would keep me away from your soccer games," right? But if the parent goes to the soccer practice, then, "Oh, they're not honoring your voice and they're not listening to you and respecting you." I mean, you can't win in that kind of situation.
Mhm.
So that's one set of parental alienation strategies. There's also just limiting contact, not bringing the child, picking them up early. There's creating the idea that the other parent is unsafe, giving the child a secret phone, like, "Call me if you don't feel safe," or, did you have enough to eat? Do you feel comfortable there? Call me anytime, I'll come get you." The parent isn't actually saying that parent wants to hurt you, but they're inducing in the child a fear or uncertainty about whether they are safe with that other parent. Other examples include referring to that other parent by his or her first name. So instead of saying, "Mom's on the phone," "Sally's calling." It seems like a little thing, but, every society, there are special names that children call their parents, and there's a reason for that. And I don't want to go into it necessarily because it's sort of long and complicated, but the point is, all human societies, children have special names for their parents. They generally don't call their parents by their first name. And like I said, there's a good reason for that. So if dad starts referring to mom as Sally to the kids, what the dad is subtly saying is that person isn't in a special relationship with you anymore. They're no more important to you than anybody else you would refer to by their first name. It's basically removing them from the category of, intimate authority figure, because that's what parents are, right? And it's just by referring to them by their first name to the child. And then the child might carry that forward to the parent. I'll stop there, but there's 17. That's just a taste of them.
Oh, no, please don't stop. I think all of these things are important. And I know we have a live audience here today who probably can relate to some of these things. Generally, though, let me ask you about it. If we've got 17, is there a clinical number that proves alienation? I mean, one by itself probably does not, unless it's egregious, I would imagine. But, how many of these 17 do we need to actively see in order to say, yes, we have a parental alienation case
Right.
here?
It's an excellent question. And the reason why there isn't a number is that it really depends on the frequency, intensity, duration, and believability. So a really effective manipulative parent, might only do one or two of these behaviors, but so effectively that it disrupts the relationship. If a parent takes a child to Brazil and tells the child, that parent tried to harm, wants to kill you, and so I'm going to take you to Brazil, a non-Hague country, and, that's only two. That's bad mouthing and limiting contact. But basically, the relationship is going to be over.
Mm.
So there is no magic number. The research shows any exposure is bad for kids, and the more exposure, the worse. And as kids get older, parents add strategies. So if you have a 0 to 6-year-old, you're more likely to use certain strategies. But as your kid becomes older, you're going to add certain strategies that might be more relevant. Asking a child to spy on the other parent, for example, look through, mom's computer or whatever. You're not going to ask a 6-year-old to do that unless they're like a computer genius. So the research shows that parents sort of add strategies based on the age of the child. But there is no, oh, it's 6, so, yep, not an alienator. Oh, it's 7, now they're an alienator. There's no cutoff.
Understood. And I'm curious from a clinical perspective also, are the alienators, do they tend to have common personality disorders or certain things that lead them to become alienators? Is there any information behind all of that research that backs that up?
Yes, and there's a little bit. It is an understudied area because, surprise, surprise, alienating parents don't admit they're alienating parents, don't agree. If you tell them you're the cause of your child's rejection of the other parent, they're not going to agree to that. So it's hard to find them to do research on them.
Mm.
It's not easy to have access. So we can infer based on the interviews that I did with adults who lived through this and talked about their parents. My mom needed to be the center of attention. My dad would get furious if I had disagreed with him. I mean, you can sort of piece together a picture that supports the idea that alienators have what used to be called cluster B personality disorders. That's sociopathy, narcissism, and borderline. And it makes sense to me because what those personality characteristics have in common, among other things, is imperviousness to feedback. In other words, a personality disorder is like a closed system. And so if you tell an alienator, like, what you're doing is hurting your kids, or your kids are going to be mad at you later when they figure this out, they wouldn't really care. And so that's sort of why it's so hard to disrupt the alienation from the perspective of working with the alienating parent, because they're not really receptive to other people's feedback. It's those kinds of personality disordered people generally put most stock in what they believe. I know I only need one antibiotic pill. I don't care if the doctor says I need a full dose. So
Understood.
The other piece that kind of connects the personality disorders to alienation is a lack of appreciation for the perspective of other people. So take a narcissist who's married, the marriage falls apart. In order to preserve their wounded ego, they will most likely devalue the other parent, right? Oh, why was I even with that person? It's so great that the marriage is over. Good riddance, I'm done, right? So that's sort of how they preserve their sense of, self-esteem.
Mm-hmm.
And in that process, they so devalue that person that they can't really appreciate that the kids might have an independent experience of that person. They don't say, like, well, that person wasn't a great husband or wife for me, but my kid, they're still an okay parent. It's like that person becomes garbage, and they expect the kids to experience that parent the same way they do. Because that's sort of part of having that kind of personality disorder, is not really appreciating other people's perspective.
Mm. It's interesting how all the dynamics of this come together. So for those who have experienced parental alienation as a parent or as a child, what remedies, what hope, what can we bring them to round out our conversation today?
So it really depends on I'll just take the parent perspective first. If your kids are under 18, the courts still have some jurisdiction, right? Once your child turns 18, the courts have no right to say, child, you need to visit or you need to be in therapy with. But as long as the child's under 18, the court has some jurisdiction. Now, courts sort of wash their hands of family dynamics once the kids get to be a little bit older, 16, 17, even then it's not impossible. But if your children are under the jurisdiction of the 18 of the courts because they're minors, the best advice is get an attorney who understands alienation, figure out what would be the proper remedy. If your kids are mildly alienated, that might be one set of remedies. If they're moderate, it might be another. If they're severe, that's a different level of remedy that you need, and see if you can put together a case. It's, I generally say to people, if your kids are 2 and you're a millionaire, go to court. Like, of course. If your kids are 17 and you're broke, don't bother. Now, that still doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. But in terms of just thinking about court, most of my clients are in the middle. They have some resources and their kids haven't aged out. And so what I try to do is help them figure out, do you have evidence of alienation? Just telling me, oh, the other parent's doing this or that isn't evidence, evidence to bring to court. What is the case law in your state? Because some states are more receptive to this idea than others, and what would be a proper remedy to ask for. So there's a lot that a parent can do if they're dealing with this and their kids are under 18 legally. Then there's the whole parenting piece, because let's say your kids are too old, or you have an attorney who says, the facts of the case aren't going to help you, don't bother going to court, which does happen. I still then work with the person on their parenting. Even if their parenting just involves texting their child, there's still strategic ways to do that. Or, trying to figure out, do you show up at their baseball game and wave? And if so, what do you do? And how do you do that? Or some parents still have actual parenting time, even though their kids are, in the process of being alienated, and there's a lot of conflict. The kids come back angry and resentful, and how do they parent in a way that doesn't, this is my favorite phrase, in a way, inadvertently reinforce the alienation. That's the number one thing targeted parents have to figure out, how not to make it worse by their reactions and interactions with the child. And there's a lot of help that targeted parents need and can get. So that's the what to do from a parent point of view if your kids are under 18. If your kids are over 18 and they're severely alienated, I can help targeted parents write a letter to their child. It's very, very parental alienation specific. It's not just like, oh, a letter. It's very tailored to their situation. It takes a while to work on the letter. There's like a whole philosophy the parent has to appreciate and endorse. And then it takes a while to write the letter. And that's had a lot of success, but it's not a magic wand. It doesn't help everybody. Some kids probably don't even open the email. There's not much we can do about that. But that is something that parents can do. I'll stop there.
My goodness, this is a lot of information we've covered in our short time together. I know that we could talk about this endlessly. Unfortunately, there is far too much of this going on. And I do want to say that, if you have a teenager who's just, I don't want to be with you, mom or dad, that's probably not parental alienation. That's probably, normal teenage angst. So don't just, decide that because you're teen, all of a sudden doesn't want to see you. That happens to all of us when they hit teenage years in most cases. But what Dr. Baker has been sharing with us today goes far beyond that normal life stage for a child. It is experienced by far too many, and I can't imagine the hurt of an alienated parent and also an alienated child when they grow up and realize, oh my gosh, this was done to me. I think that's a topic for another show. So I'd love to have you back to discuss that sometime again. Thank you so much, Dr. Baker, for your time today. We're going to end the show here. I do want to let you know that at Divorcetown USA, we have a plethora of resources to help you. We'll also be putting Dr. Baker's books up in the resources section of the marketplace. We have a free roadmap that can help you decide what are your best options for getting divorced and how to begin that process with the pros and cons of each. We also offer 12 twice a month support group meetings that are free for anywhere in the country. They're virtual. And we offer free consults at divorcemoneymatters.com, which is my primary website as a certified divorce financial analyst. So I thank you for joining us here today, and we look forward to having you here again for your place for divorce help and hope. We have it here for you, folks. Thank you for joining us. And thank you so much, Dr. Baker.
My pleasure.
Hang on, folks. I'm trying to turn the screen off. There we go.